Today I'm going to walk you through my entire color grading workflow in Davinci Resolve. Let's take a look. All right, a couple things before we get started. First, if you haven't watched my color grading basics video or the video where I explain the difference between the types of nodes in the color page, I highly suggest you check those out. They'll be linked below. And for those of you who have watched that, I'm hoping that this video will maybe clarify or, just make things a little bit less confusing if you were left feeling a little lost after watching those videos. The second thing is that this workflow that I'm about to show you is the workflow that I have found that works best for me. And this is something that I have come to after watching a lot of tutorials and watching just a lot of tutorials and trying a whole bunch of different stuff and figuring out what works for me and what doesn't work for me. And if this video leaves you feeling a little confused, if this workflow doesn't work for you, then I suggest you do what I did. Watch a bunch of tutorials, watch a bunch of videos, try a bunch of different stuff until you find what works for you. The workflow that I'm about to show you is heavily influenced by another YouTuber named Kazi. He is an amazing colorist. He works in Davinci Resolve. A lot of his videos are where he recreates color grades from different movies, and every time I watch one of his videos, it completely blows my mind. The dude is a genius. I'll link his channel below as well. You should definitely check him out because when it comes to color grading, that dude is just top notch. And the reason why I chose this workflow, the reason why I came to the conclusion that this workflow was the best for me is because it works just as well with log footage as it does with Rec 709 footage. For example, here in Davinci Resolve, I've got two clips here. One of them is some S-Log2 footage that my friend Leela sent me, who is an amazing creator. She does a lot of Premiere Pro tutorials, After Effects tutorials, stuff like that. And she was kind enough to send me some S-Log2 footage. And then the other clip that I have here is a short clip from one of my own videos. This is actually from the video where I talk about the first 5 things you should invest in as a video editor. You should definitely check that out if you haven't seen it yet. I think it's a pretty good video. So let's go ahead and start with the log footage, the footage from Leela. We're gonna first find what's called a hero frame. A hero frame is basically the frame that you're gonna use when you're color grading, and typically what I look for in a hero frame is a frame where everything that I need to see when color grading is in the frame. So let's just go ahead and move through these frames here until I find something that is looking pretty good right there, because I've got the hands, I've got the face, I've got the rest of the scene. We're good to go there. So next thing we're gonna do is set up what's called a node tree, which is basically just a roadmap. We'll call it a roadmap. It's basically we're gonna lay out all of our nodes, all of the steps that we're gonna take when we're color grading this footage. And that way we can get a bird's eye view of everything we need to do so we don't get lost in the process. And also the other great thing about setting up a node tree or a roadmap first is that if something goes wrong, you can pretty much tell which node you need to go back to in order to fix something. So let's go ahead and set up our node tree. Our first node here, I'm gonna go ahead and right click it, hit node label. We're gonna label this noise reduction. This is where we're gonna put our noise reduction. Let's go ahead and hit Alt S, add another serial node, and let's add actually a second serial node here. This one here is going to be exposure. EXP, not ESP. We are not psychic here. And then this one here is going to be balance and saturation. Let's go ahead and hit another node, and we're going to label this one look. And then we'll go ahead and right click that, hit add node and add parallel. Why didn't that work? Add node, add parallel. There we go. And we're going to label this one hue versus. Normally you could hit Alt P in order to add a new parallel node, but Alt P also pauses my screen recording software. So we have to go the long way around here. Moving on, let's go ahead and click our layer mixer, hit Alt S, add a new node. This one is going to be labeled LUT. This is where we're going to apply our LUT. And then we're going to add yet another node. label this one skin, and then 3 more nodes. This node is going to be our vignette. This node here is going to be our final adjustments. And then this last node is going to be sharpening. And now really quickly, I want to go ahead and just organize these a little bit because I like things being nice and tidy so I don't get lost. And there we go. We've got our node tree. We now have a roadmap. We can see everything that we're going to do to this footage, but this isn't necessarily the order in which we're going to do things. For instance, we're going to actually save noise reduction and sharpening for last because noise reduction is pretty taxing on the computer. So I want to be sure to get all my color grading done before I add the noise reduction. Also, what we're going to start out with is the LUT, which actually is in the middle of the node tree. So let's go ahead and do that now. The reason why we're doing this is because we want the LUT to do most of the work, so we have to do as little manual tweaks to the original footage as possible. So let's go ahead and select our LUT node. We're going to head over to LUTs, and we're going to make sure we're in our master LUT folder, and we're going to find the Sony S-Log2 to Rec 709 LUT, and we're going to drag that into our LUT node. Let me go ahead and get rid of these LUTs right now. And you can see we've got quite a bit of work to do. We've got some serious highlight clipping going on. That is no good at all. We have to tweak the exposure in order to get that right. So let's do that now. We're going to head over to our exposure node, and I'm going to head over to my curves, and we're going to go to my custom curves, and we're just going to go ahead and tweak this until we like it. So we definitely have to bring those highlights down. Actually, before I go any farther, let's change my scope to the waveform. You can see everything is clipping over here. This is no good. So first thing I want to do is bring these highlights down until my skin on my face is right at about 75% or so. That's 768 line. That's looking okay. That's actually looking a little bit dark for my tastes, but we'll see. Next thing we're going to do is bring our shadows down. Our shadows are actually pretty much good to go. We just want to bring them down to where they are just touching that 0 line or just above it. Right there is good. I'm liking that. And let's go ahead and we're just going to make sure that our skin isn't going anywhere. I want to bring those highlights down a little bit more so they're not clipping. That's good right there. And let's bring that skin tone up just a little bit. Boom, right there. We've got good contrast. We've got everything looks good. It looks good. The exposure looks good. Next, let's look at balance and saturation. So what we want to first do is add some saturation. This is a pretty desaturated image. So what I'm going to do is bump this up from 50 to about 75. I think that looks good right about there. And just for the sake of timing, we're gonna do a real quick color correction. Normally I would do this manually, but like I said, for the sake of time, let's go ahead and come over here to this windowsill, which I believe should be white. And we're gonna go ahead and click on that, and it's gonna do some slight adjustments, and I think we're good right there. We got a good balance and saturation. Now we're color corrected. We've got good exposure, good contrast, and our colors are balanced. So I'm really liking what we have so far. Let's move on to the look. This is where we're gonna start putting together a creative look. We're gonna start really dialing in what we want to see on the screen. So what I want to do is actually create kind of a subtle teal and orange look. I know it's very basic and it's kind of overused at this point, but it's really the easiest, quickest look to get. So we're gonna do it. So what I'm gonna do is drag some teal into the entire image. Let's go ahead and change our scope over to vector scope. Just gonna pull that teal into the image. That looks pretty decent right there. Now, when I did that, I pulled teal into the entire image, even her skin tones, the highlights, and everything. And what we want to do now is use the hue versus hue curve and the hue versus saturation curve and the hue versus luma curve to kind of bring back those skin tones and make them pop a little bit. So let's go ahead and go to our hue versus node. And this is a parallel node. So if you remember from my nodes video, this is going to work separately, but it's still gonna blend a little bit with that look node, so everything kind of looks good together. So we have our hue versus node selected. We're gonna come down to our curves. We're gonna come over to hue versus hue. I'm gonna select the red and the yellow, and we're gonna go ahead. I think the red is actually pretty good right there. What we wanna do is bring that yellow in so our skin is right along this skin tone line here. That is looking pretty good right about there. Now let's go ahead and go to hue versus saturation. We're gonna select the red and the yellow. I'm gonna bump the saturation of that red up a little bit and bump the saturation of that orange up. And now you can see that our skin is starting to pop a little bit more, and it's separating itself from the cyan that we put everywhere else, that teal that we put everywhere else. And now we're gonna, just for an added bit of life to that skin, let's go to hue versus luma. Select the red and the yellow, and we're gonna bring the red a little bit down. We're gonna bump up the luma of that yellow. I think that's looking pretty good right about there. That's looking pretty decent, I think. And next, all we have to do, really, I mean, we have our look, but what I want to do is really bring those oranges out, really bring those skin tones out and all of that stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to qualify those oranges. We're going to focus on the skin tones and really qualify all that stuff and add some orange to the midtones and the highlights and really pull that out so it just really pops. So let's go ahead and go over to our skin node, and we're going to go over to our qualifier, and we're going to select the skin. Let's go ahead and use the highlight. That's a fairly decent selection right there, actually. Let's go ahead and there we go. I like that right there. So let's go ahead and denoise just a little bit, do a little bit of clean black, some clean white, and blur that radius. And there we go. That's looking really good right there. We've got some of the desk. We've got her skin. This is looking pretty. This is a good qualification right here. I'm pretty good. That's pretty good for a first attempt. Let's go ahead and drag some orange into the gamma and into the gain. See, when we add the orange to the gain, because Leela's skin is so fair, we get a good amount of orange in there. And let's go ahead and deselect our highlights. And that's looking really good right there. Now, this is a big contrast between her skin and the rest of the image. There's a big contrast between that teal and orange. Now, if you don't like that, that's fine. What you can do with that skin node still selected, you can come over to the key, and what we can do is bring that key output down until it blends in with that teal. I'm thinking that looks pretty good right there. So next thing we need to do are just some last minute adjustments. First of all, we're gonna add the vignette. I showed you how to do this in my power windows video. We're gonna go over to our power windows, add a circle power window, and we're just gonna stretch this out, move this over a little bit, maybe widen it, make that super soft. Really feather that out. And we're gonna make sure that we are working with the outside of that power window. And then we're gonna come over to our curves. We're gonna go to custom curves, and we're gonna bring those highlights down about 25%. And now Leela is really popping out from the rest of the video. That's looking really good, I think. Now we're just gonna go over to our adjustments, and this is where we do just any last minute tweaks that we see, things that don't really correspond to any of the other nodes. So for instance, one of the things that I do is I desaturate the shadows and the whites or the highlights. And so we're gonna come over here to Luma versus saturation, and we're going to add a point for the shadows and a point for the highlights. Let's drag down that end so we desaturate those highlights a little bit. Then we're gonna drag down the dark end so we desaturate those shadows. And that's looking pretty good right there. I think we're almost done. Last thing I wanna do though is come back over to my custom curves. I'm gonna come back over to that waveform, because I think I want to add just a little bit more contrast. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna bring that skin up just a little bit so it's back on that 75% line. And we're just gonna add a little bit of an S curve down here. And now, if I deactivate all of those nodes, hit Alt-D, there's our log footage, and there's our final grade. So that worked out pretty well. We've got a nice color grade there from log footage, and that workflow just works. The only thing I have left to do is noise reduction and sharpening, which we really don't have to worry about here. One, because there's actually very, very little noise in this footage, and two, because I showed you how to do this a couple videos ago, so I don't really need to show you how to do it again, do I? Let's move on to the Rec 709 footage, because this same workflow works just as well, and I just want to show you that just to put your mind at ease if you're not using a camera that shoots log. So let's take a look at the clip from one of my videos. We're gonna do the same thing, find the hero frame. Actually, I think that very first frame might be good. We've got the skin and we've got everything else. So that's good right there. So I've already got my node tree set up. It's set up the same exact way. We've got noise reduction, exposure, balance and saturation, look, LUT, skin, hue versus, vignette, adjustments, and sharpening. So let's go ahead and get started. We're gonna start with a LUT, but instead of a LUT, I'm going to do film convert nitrate because I love film convert nitrate. So I'm gonna go ahead and drop film convert nitrate into the LUT. Now, if you don't have film convert nitrate, that's okay. Davinci Resolve Studio, at least if you have Studio, has a bunch of built-in film emulation LUTs, and you can drop those in there as well. You'll have to do a little bit more work in the exposure and the balance and saturation and all of that stuff, but it works just as well, really. And even with the log footage, you don't have to use that S-Log2 or that log to Rec 709. You can drop in a Rec 709 film emulation LUT and do that same workflow, which really just opens up a whole world of possibilities. It's one of the reasons why I love this workflow. So we've got film convert nitrate in there. I'm gonna go ahead and choose my camera profile real quick. We got Canon, 80D, neutral, apply. Let's go ahead and bring that grain strength all the way down. I'm gonna go ahead and choose a film stock. I think we're gonna go with this one right here. Next thing we're gonna do is come over to exposure, and we're going to bring those shadows down right about there. Looks good. We're gonna bring the skin down. Actually, let's go ahead and just bring the highlights down. That's looking good right there. And then bring those midtones up. And that's looking pretty good right there for exposure. Now let's go ahead and do balance and saturation. So we've got a fairly warm image here. I think I messed up the white balance in this video. Let's go ahead and do the RGB parade. We're just going to cool this down just a bit. That's looking good right about there. Okay. Now let's go to the look node. We're gonna do the same thing. We're just gonna do a quick teal and orange. Primaries wheels, offset, drag that teal over the image. Go ahead and change over to our vector scope. We also wanna add some saturation here. We're gonna bump this up to about 60, maybe a little bit more. Let's go with 65. That looks good right there. All right, now, we've got our look. We've added in our teal. That looks good right about there. Now let's go ahead and go over to our hue versus node. Do hue versus hue, red and yellow. Bring that red right about there. Bring those yellows. I'm gonna do hue versus saturation. Bring the red up just a bit. Bring that yellow up a bit. Bring that red up a little bit more. That's looking pretty good right there. Let's go ahead over to our skin. We're gonna qualify the skin. Turn on our highlight selector. That's looking pretty good right now. Let's go ahead and denoise that a little bit. Clean black, clean white, blur the radius. It's looking pretty good. I'm gonna drag that width. And that's looking fairly decent right there. Let's go ahead and add some orange to the gamma, orange to the gain, and let's bring that key output down to about 0.6. And that's looking pretty good right there. And then from there, we're gonna go ahead and add our vignette. Soften that out, bring those highlights down about 25%, so I'm really popping out of the screen. Last minute adjustments. All we're going to do is desaturate those shadows and highlights. I'm gonna come over to our custom curves. I actually wanna bring up, that's looking good right there. Brought up those shadows just a little bit. Let's go back over to our waveform, see what we got. Let's go ahead and bring our skin up just a tad. That's looking good right there. And all I have to do is add some noise reduction and sharpening, and there you go. This workflow is super easy to figure out. It's super easy to just work through the steps. Like once you have the steps down and you know what you need to do in each node, it's really, really easy to just pump out quick color grades that look good time after time after time. And it's kind of like a workflow hack, really, to have it set up like this. If you want to know some other Davinci Resolve workflow hacks, make sure you check out this video right here. And for more videos on how to make better videos, make sure you subscribe to my channel and hit that bell so you don't miss anything. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.